It has been some time since I've done a novel review for the channel. There have been a few releases of literature for Battletech recently, though mostly from Shrapnel magazine, which I should add have been fun reads mostly, at least recently. This review will eventually contain spoilers, so be warned. However, they will be clearly marked as when they are going to begin, and visually marked with a graphic on screen while they are happening. This is the first truly Intersphere-centric novel of the new Ilclan era, and I'm more than impressed, as I think this might knock A Question of Survival off my top-ranked novel for the era, so far. The novel itself is mostly about the Federated Sons and their quest to restore their realm to greatness, after their decline and near collapse during the Dark Age era, and particularly focuses on their problems with the Draconis Combine, Taurian Concordat, and increasingly internal discord. It does more than set things up like A Question of Survival, for Clan Ghostbear's internal conflict, which will be documented in Dominions Divided, as it explores much of the content that the readers will actually be getting in the main sourcebook regarding House Davion and its military and political moves. The author is Michael J. Caravella, I believe is how you pronounce his name, who has written several other works, mostly short stories, but has written 2 novels from what I can tell prior, which are both centered on the Northwind Highlanders, a unit that I don't have an overabundance of interest in, if I'm being honest. I haven't read these novels, so I can't espouse their quality, but they are the Grey Watch Protocol and Paid in Blood. It's important to note that these novels aren't only written by the author in many senses, and that the publisher has a major presence in them as well. For a series novel like this to be good and successful, they need these 2 forces to be working together and they need to have trust with one another, or at least not to be obstructing one another. And I definitely felt this novel came together very, very well. If Michael's other works are the same quality as this one, it'd be a real mark towards his skill as an author. With all of that being said, let's begin talking about some of the characters. I would make the argument right out the gate that despite the prominence of the first prince in the story, that the true main character and focus appears to be Eric Sandoval, which is ironic given some of the events that happen in the story. He is an interesting, conflicted figure, as the politics of the unstable Federated Sons around him places him into an increasingly difficult position. And funnily enough, Eric seems to embody the ideal of the Federated Sons more than most of his peers. It's where he's not unwilling to do what it takes to get the job done, but he isn't willing to break his warrior's code to get there. His journey is there from within the story from the get-go, but it really does take off after the first of the major conflicts with their enemies is resolved. Julian was a surprise to me. The wounds which the Capellans left on him do appear to go further than just his body, as his demeanor has changed, and not unrealistically so, since his confrontation with Denai Liao. He has learned both good and bad things from his past, and from his brief time so far as First Prince, to be clear. Julian makes mistakes in the book, and is put into an increasing bind, with his inner circle around him feeding him information which seems designed to make him more paranoid, sometimes rightly, and other times creating the conditions for the paranoia in the first place. The former ambassador of the Federated Sons to the Republic of the Sphere, Kim Hasek hails from the Capellan Marches, with her brother being in charge of the region as Duke. She is placed into a compromised position several times, first by Julian, then by her brother. She seems conflicted with her loyalties to the state, her family, and eventually Julian, as she inevitably makes choices in her own best interests, and the best interests of the state. It's impossible to say that Toranaga is not a main character, even if he doesn't have as many scenes as Kurita Yori. His presence is felt throughout the novel and frames it. Ironically, one might have thought him smug or arrogant, but he doesn't seem to possess these traits. He is calm, clear-sighted, competent, driven, and ruthless. Every decision he makes is calculated, and he understands his role by the end of his appearance. He has a legacy to maintain, as well as a future victory to sow. Yori is a far more cunning character than a mere puppet as many thought her to be. Shrewd, calculating, and utterly ruthless, she will do anything to cement her own grip on power, as well as to remove her would-be enemies within the state. For Yori, her victories are many, and she clearly knows how to use them. There are a lot of minor characters in this: baronesses, counts, colonels, field marshals, generals, and a whole assorted list. I'm only going to mention one of them. A minor role within the story, and one with large ramifications for the setting and the Federated Suns, is helmed by Alexander Hasek. Arrogant, arguably cruel, as well as short-sighted, Hasek is a man desperate for validation and security, and much to the detriment of those around him. I don't want to discuss in great detail what happens in the story from here on out, at least not without giving people a full warning before I go into the spoilers. These spoilers are not only for the novel, but inevitably for Dominions Divided as well. So do I recommend this book? I will do a brief breakdown of the Ilclan books I've covered so far. I reviewed Redemption Rights and recommended it. I reviewed A Question of Survival and recommended it. I reviewed elements of Treason, Opportunities, and pulled my recommendation from it for various reasons. So, with the Damocles Sanction, I do recommend this book, and it's very probably my favorite book of the new era. I'm going to go in hard for this particular book. I am making a huge recommendation to grab this book. I have to stress, I recommend that you buy this book if you like the Federated Suns. Buy this book if you like the Draconis Combine, even if it's in a somewhat secondary role in the novel. Buy this book if you like the houses of the Inner Sphere, and the politicking that takes place within them. To give a brief description as to why, it's made up of Inner Sphere characters, which are well written, doing Inner Sphere things. Despite Redemption Rights and A Question of Survival doing good jobs with clanners on several levels, it's not something that feels as impactful or feels quite like Battletech, without a bunch of soldiers and nobles fighting to hold their titles or expand their power. They all play the Game of Thrones, and there are winners, losers, and players keeping themselves in the game. This is what Battletech is all about for a lot of people. So this is a must-get in my opinion. I very, very much enjoyed it. The spoilers will begin shortly. What a hell of a trip. I couldn't talk about the story structure earlier, but much to my surprise, in the approximately 400-page novel, the first thing that gets resolved is New Avalon. The invasion of New Avalon happens very quickly, but it is also where the divisions are almost immediately seen in the Davion camp. So Julian was nearly killed by Deny Liao, and lost several fingers and a leg doing it. It makes him mortal, both in his own eyes and in the eyes of his council. He also has Eric Sandoval as his champion, a man who he does not want to be his champion. Eric switched loyalties from Caleb, but only once there was no other choice. He also acted as regent of the Federated Suns, and didn't do a bad job before Julian entered the picture and claimed the title of First Prince. They butt heads over strategies at several points, and Julian begins to imply that he needs to lead the attack. The opening stages of the planned assault on New Avalon are a disaster, with the attack force taking significant losses in space before making planetfall, as Toranaga had set up his defenses to the best of his abilities with his limited resources. He's been left to die, and he knows it. While he does believe he can make his way out of it eventually, he does the most to achieve victory. Toranaga knows his follies throughout the campaign. On world, Eric is the one making the most progress, but his force appears to be outmatched at one key moment, only for Julian to arrive, seemingly to take the glory of the victory for himself. While this is unlikely, it does bear the appearance of such. and even before this point in the battle, the Prince's Champion's staff allude to it. Funnily enough, Toranaga in his Atlas had trouble stopping Sandoval in his Axeman. And even while the Axeman is defeated, it managed to do enough damage to Toranaga that he's little match for Julian. Julian and his forces intervene, and he does attack, but Toranaga in his Atlas quickly surrenders. Something no one expected for him to do. He also asks his forces across the planet to surrender. New Avalon has won, but at a clear cost. And Toranaga surrenders not to the first Prince Julian Davion, but to the Prince's champion Eric Sandoval. The internal tensions between the two men only grow from there, just as Toranaga had hoped. Then worse, because he surrendered, the Davions don't actually know what to do with Toranaga, and it becomes a massive political issue. He even asks for the right to commit seppuku, and asks for Eric Sandoval to be his second in the ritual, to honorably end his life with dignity with the help of the man who defeated him. It's a genuine request, but he knows it will further divide the leadership of House Davion. The entire thing ends up being a debacle, which ends with Julian himself visiting Toranaga and making things worse. My favorite scene in the entire novel is the first perspective piece with Toranaga, before the battle, where he is seeking calmness, serenity, and contemplation for the failures of the Davions, but also for some of his own problems. That scene, in essence, helps him transition to the scene in the cell, where he is mostly serene and confronts Julian Davion, who has requested to meet him alone. I won't spoil any of the dialogue for this scene. You really must read it. I am going to use a lot of Toranaga's dialogue to cover him in a video at some point. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's the scene that Devlin Stone should have had with Alaric Ward, had Hour of the Wolf been a better book. Toranaga understands his own fate, but also informs Julian that he has taken a poisoned chalice in many senses. Julian realizes this, and seeing Toranaga near the end of taking some pleasure in it, feels pity for him, and mercilessly executes Toranaga with his sidearm in his cell. Toranaga, according to Davion law, tradition, and culture, was at the very least owed a trial. But a trial could make the government look bad. He was perhaps even owed an honorable self-removal as he'd requested, because he had surrendered and saved many lives in doing so, Davion lives at that. Perhaps they could have sent him back to Kurita, which would have been another plan, but all of those seemed to reinforce Toranaga's final play. Truth be told, Julian, in my eyes, shot Toranaga out of rage, anger, frustration, or as a way to get out that his opposition hadn't seen. But it would be discovered very quickly by Eric Sandoval that Toranaga had been dishonorably executed in his cell by the First Prince. And this furthers the divide between the two men, especially as Julian sends Eric on a dangerous mission immediately afterwards, which only further convinces Eric that Julian wants him out of the way. Unfortunately for Julian, Eric does seem to get credit for liberating New Avalon, and does get the credit for liberating Robinson earlier, a planet which he is now the Duke of. He is popular amongst those who rejoined the Federated Sons from the Republic, and is popular with the rank-and-file soldiers, and worse, with the nobility. The situation will only get worse through the novel, despite Julian's efforts to stop it. While this is happening, Alexander Hasek invades the Taurian Concordat, dragging the Federated Sons into another conflict it can't afford, all in an effort to solidify his own rule, but also to display that he is a military leader. He is defeated, his units destroyed, and Alexander is captured by the Taurians in shame and humiliation. He would be broken out of captivity by his sister Kim's plans, who was sent by Julian to try to stop the war from escalating with the Taurians. Eric himself would have problems to deal with at home too, as it appeared his cousin Colleen was attempting to usurp his rule in the Draconis marches. Though he would handle it. In the end, he would conquer most of the Dragon's Tongue, and only further solidify his legacy. Kurita Yori herself had been assassinating people who she viewed as disloyal during this time, as well as putting her own people in place. She really is the coordinator now, and despite her forces losing much of the Dragon's Tongue, she appears to have the strongest grip on power of any House Lord in the Inner Sphere at the moment. The dragon has rallied behind her, and the Combine's losses don't remove many of its gains, as worlds still remain in their possession from their conquests, and she took home many trophies, including technologies from the NAIS. Yori Kurita defeated her master, Toranaga. Only her reign now looms over the Combine. There is an immense amount more in this book, with more dialogue, characters, intrigue, and interactions. Julian is convinced he's going to try to marry Kim Hasek despite their own rocky relationship at several points. Julian and Eric have almost a complete fallout near the end, and only the fact that both men can't afford to fight one another yet stops it from devolving into open warfare. The Federated Sons are, at this moment, perhaps only usurped in instability by the Lyran Commonwealth. What is happening within it, at this moment, makes it look much more like the Free Worlds League than anything else. And I love it. Also, one of Victor's progeny makes an appearance, but I won't spoil how. But the Steiner Davions, or rather the Davion Merricks, are perhaps going to be making more of an appearance going forward. It was great. I laughed out loud at several points, but again, even in my spoiler review, I can't give away some of these scenes just because I won't be able to give them justice. You really should read this novel if you're wanting to get the best of the Ilclan era literature so far. I definitely rank this very highly, and I do think it's better than both Redemption Rights and A Question of Survival, two novels I definitely ranked highly before. Julian is an interesting, conflicted character who gets more corrupted as he tries to hold on to his position, and has to deal with the realities of being a leader. Eric is perhaps a more fitting leader between the two, and slowly grows from not wanting it to openly resenting Julian for his, in his view, inadequacies as a leader. I'll be clear though, Julian, for all of his faults, is 100 times the leader of Captain General Nicole Hallis Hughes in the Free Worlds League, so at least the Federated Sons have that going for it. Toranaga stole the show when he appeared in the novel. I was super pleased with his outing, and I knew he was going to go down, admittedly at some point. Toranaga was a superior commander to Julian Davion, and a superior warrior and politician overall. He knew he was finished but made his enemies pay dearly for victory, and then tainted that victory. It was a fantastic exit for the character, and while I wish we got more of him, what we did get was more than enough. I've said it long before this novel, or Dominions Divided coming out, to steal a line from Ric Flair's promotions. To be the man, you gotta beat the man. And Toranaga was the man. Julian may have killed him in his cell, but he didn't beat him. Toranaga is still the man. Rest in peace, you magnificent bastard. The summer grass is all that remains of a soldier's dreams. The summer grass, the splendid dreams of samurai warriors. So yeah, I love the book. I think the best House Lord of the current era is now Kurita Yori, and I'm extremely excited to get my claws into Dominions Divided. I can't stress this enough. This is, in my opinion, the novel most worthy of your time that they have released so far. 5 out of 5 is not something I give very often, but I'll give it this time. I loved every moment of reading this book. But now, with that, we must withdraw. Thank you for joining me here today. I thought my last video of the year would be yesterday's, but Catalyst dropped this and I had to read it. I tore through it in the morning and it gave me enough time to write this, which is both hilarious and interesting to me. But with that, if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to the channel. I do updates very frequently and you'll be happy with the content, I think. Also, a huge thank you to all of the YouTube members for this channel. When you hit the join button and become a member, you take an extra step in supporting the content on this channel, and I can't thank you enough. Because this content really is only possible because of viewers like you. And to conclude, I will see all of you in the comment section below, and Happy New Year.